Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and we got a pretty big update to that Stop Killing Games story, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Stop Killing Games, for anybody that doesn't know, yes, 2 days ago I made a video where I talked about Stop Killing Games. I talked about how the initiative, basically was kind of at its finishing lines, and there really wasn't a lot of positivity in terms of it crossing its finish line. Now, of course, since then, ladies and gentlemen, there's been plenty of content creators that have covered this story. Charlie, me, obviously Ross, the person who spearheaded this campaign to start off with. And, 2 days ago, the actual initiative was at like 55,000 signatures? Today, ladies and gentlemen, in 2 days, it crossed 51%. Now, I really think a lot of this comes from the fact that obviously one of the biggest voices that is now talking about Stop Killing Games, probably Charlie at this point. And, obviously through the efforts of everybody speaking positively over here, that's a pretty big jump, okay? That's actually huge. And I don't think anybody should, discount it. Now, to me personally, I think having 500,000 signatures should be enough for the government to look at something and think, wow, we should kind of talk about, preserving software. Now, obviously, there was a bit of controversy to the Stop Killing Game stuff. We talked about it 2 days ago. There was a YouTuber known as Pirate Software who very much was not a fan of Stop Killing Games, and apparently still doesn't seem to be a fan of Stop Killing Games. And to me, I don't really think of this as a drama thing or whatever. I think of it as just good loss to pass. I think it's just a good conversation to have. Obviously, I think of Stop Killing Games as, just one cog in the giant scheme, right? If you ever watch channels like Lewis Ross, and if you ever watched any tech channels, one of the most important things for a lot of people in this space is things like right to repair, right? Is like you should be able to own something. You should be able to have some dominion over the stuff you purchase. Otherwise, corporations will basically fuck us in the ass till we're bleeding completely, okay? It doesn't matter for a corporation. It doesn't matter. For them, it's all about making money. For us, it's all about preserving the stuff that we work hard to purchase, right? Now, obviously, I look at video games as video games, right? And some people look at this as, children's toys. But to me, video games are kind of just like a movie. They're like music, they're like software in general, they're just like any commercial good that you buy. And if you buy something, you should either be able to possess it, right, for an indiscriminate amount of time, or a company should just straight up tell you that you're renting stuff. Like I said in my previous video, if companies were outright telling you that you weren't buying their product and you were just renting it, I definitely will guarantee you that will have an actual impact on sales. Now, obviously, this needs to get to 1 million signatures. Now, do I think it'll get to 1 million signatures? I'm being positive. I actually hope that it will. I think the jump that we saw from literally yesterday is pretty massive, and it just continues to go up. The momentum that Ross felt like that he lost, I feel like that momentum is starting to kick up again. And honestly, if it meant getting into the muck with talking shit and correcting records, I think that's honestly what you have to do if it means doing something as good as this. Now, why is Stop Killing Games a good thing? Why is it a net positive? I'm going to go through a lot of technologies that communities have made that are literally preserving the games that we love and cherish all throughout history. So one of the things that I saw, and I can't verify this for myself, but it kind of made my head ache a little bit from Pirate Software. So one of the comments that he wrote here was, for those who don't understand what MYM is and are spamming comments, this is a user-generated content game where you make dungeons that other people play in. Without a large player base, the game becomes instantly stale due to lack of dungeon variation. The community has all but abandoned it, so preserving the game would not keep it playable or enjoyable. Hosting it privately does not fix this issue, as it's designed with a large-scale creativity in mind. Without that, it's a hollow husk and unable to be played to any real extent. This isn't about preservation, it's about a waning player base on a game I enjoyed. You cannot preserve a game's true intention by saving the files. You cannot preserve the essence of a game like this with a small group of players. It needs thousands or more active players to give the actual experience. Stop Killing Games cannot fix that problem. Now, Meet Your Maker, for anybody that doesn't know, is an actual like building game where actual like gamers get together, they build these entire like, you know, levels, and obviously it's then up to you as a player to play through these user created levels. Now again, obviously this is a game that has a lifespan, right? But the preservation of the content that people have been doing and making since the first day of this game's launch up until the very end of its lifespan is important, because let's say you come back to this game, this moment in time, like 10, 15 years later, it's important that there is like a repository of this game that exists so we can at least play what the community built, right? Do you want to lose all of this content, all of this history to time just because the new game comes out or some newer sequel releases? Like, do we have to accept planned obsolescence? And if games are obsolete, do we have to let them completely die when we could have an option to preserve the content that is generated within them? So this is where I feel like I'm reading Kojima levels of fucking pretentiousness, except in this situation, Kojima's actually produced a bunch of video games, okay? From what I understand, Pirate Software hasn't even shipped one out the door yet. Now, there's a lot of people that pointed out that apparently he had ties to like Rivals of Aether 2, which is a live service game, but I don't really think this is a completely negative situation. Again, as much as his words rub me the wrong way, I like to think of the best in people, okay? I really like to think that at best, this probably was just a misunderstanding. But reading stuff like this comment burns me a little bit. Because, yes, I understand, once a game falls off, like, yes, guys, Halo 3 fell off. You know what I mean? All the content in Halo 3, it's old. It's not, nobody new was coming in to make new maps, new screenshots, new anything. In fact, the community for that game on the Xbox 360 is effectively fucking dead. But preserving that community, preserving that experience is what's important, right? Preserving the game itself is what matters. Because down the road, let's say somebody wants to play or see how a game worked even, right? Like 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, they have the option of seeing it. So when he talks about user-generated games, I want to go through some technologies that community members have made. So for instance, this is LittleBigArchive. Now, if you don't know LittleBigArchive, LittleBigArchive is a repository for levels that users have made for a game known as LittleBigPlanet. Now, if you don't know what LittleBigPlanet is, it's a platformer game for the PlayStation 3, PSP, PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, and I think it might have a PS5 version, I'm not entirely sure. But the community over here created level packs, profiles, community objects, game modes, and all types of challenges. So that if you, down the road, played this game that released literally back in like 2008, 2007, you can go to all of these projects, download these community levels, and you can run them on an actual hacked PlayStation 3, or you can run them underneath RPCS 3, which is what I did. Now, the thing about it is, obviously, to give you an idea, these are not, you know, every single level that has been made. But if you go through this spreadsheet, ladies and gentlemen, according to this list, 4,875 levels have actually been preserved by this community. So let's say that you missed out on something like, LittleBigPlanet, and you want to experience this era of gaming down the road. Much like I like to go back to Super Nintendo games, PlayStation 1 games, this repository exists so anybody can experience something. Yes, we know LittleBigPlanet is dead. We know that the spirit of the game is not going to be captured with new content every day. But I think somebody playing a fucking 15-year-old game kind of knows that, okay? I think most people that have a functional fucking brain know that they're not getting that in-time experience. But they're also not getting a game that's been lost. Some of these levels probably meant a lot to somebody. Some of these levels are actually pretty intricate and fun. And some of these levels allow you to look at what people created back in the day. So one project that, again, is really interesting is Open Course World. Now, I'm sure you guys also have played games like Super Mario Maker and Mario Maker 2. Well, thankfully, a community of fans for this game have created a project or are working on something known as Open Course World. And of course, you can play this in an emulator or an actual custom firmware Nintendo Switch. So basically, they made a mod that reroutes the network requests in the game to their specific server. And of course, what they want to do is preserve a shit ton of Mario Maker levels. So eventually down the road, when something like, I don't know, Nintendo servers tend to go down, which, again, most servers will, right? Whether you're Microsoft, whether you're Sony, whether you're Nintendo, whether you're one of the biggest companies in the world, eventually, when there's not enough money on the table, you will probably not want to pay for server hosting. But that doesn't mean the community doesn't want to come together and put together as much of this software, as much of this actual, like, as much of this, like, community-created content as they can. Because the thing is, it's about preserving video games as they are, the history of them, and of course to make sure that down the road, if somebody wants to play Mario Maker 2, they can. Now, by Thor's logic, again, if a game just goes down, what's the harm in it? I mean, you know what? Stop Killing Games is not going to help, publishers develop an initiative to keep their projects alive, I guess. You're going to miss access to that in-time experience. You're not going to get that spirit or whatever the pretentious shit you're hearing here. The reality of it is that obviously this game, Hitman, is a brilliant title, okay? Unfortunately, it's a game that requires you to be having a constant internet connection all the time for progression. Now, you could play the levels without the internet, but without progression and like a lot of the community-created content, or really just the content that flows into the live service model, it's kind of a game that loses a lot of its replay value. Well, thankfully, without the help of IO Interactive, who haven't given a sunset plan, a guarantee, as far as I know yet, there's projects like the Peacock project, where, again, the community has put together a project to keep this game alive long after it releases. You know how I played this game on the actual airports, like airplanes without the internet connection on a Steam Deck? By setting it up via their easy-to-follow installation guide, so you can play Hitman and its content without requiring IO Interactive servers, which will go down at some point. I know that for some people, like, I guess it seems Pirate Software or anybody with this defeatist mentality, if that it doesn't preserve the ethos of the game or like the in-time experience, I think people know it. I also think that people just like to preserve and keep old experiences active for as long as they can. Because if you're willing to lose your history, if you're willing to just let these things wither and go away and become lost fucking media, then realistically, I don't think you're somebody that cares about gaming or gaming history. You know what? These AAA companies released the new $80 fucking Mario Maker. I'll just jump onto that and play it, all right? Completely ignoring the fact that, if you look at the history of video games, and I even talked about, PT recently, like a game released 10 years ago that you can just start to emulate on PC and preserve an actual piece of gaming history that we as a community talked about pretty extensively. And it's an actual identifiable part of at least horror video games, right? Like that subsect of the gaming community. If you're somebody that doesn't care about preserving this kind of shit or keeping these services active and alive so that down the road that $60 purchase you made is still playable, then again, I don't think you care about gaming. The actual project of Stop Killing Games is simple. It's just to keep games alive. It's not to keep them as unneeded rentals in the space. And again, the community has went above and beyond in preserving even networks. So for instance, Pretendo is a network that if you have a 3DS, if you have a Wii U, you can actually experience a clean room reverse engineered version of their network, so you can at least play certain games with your friends online, right? So for instance, if you wanted to play things like Kid Icarus Uprising on your 3DS, if you wanted to play some Mario Kart 7, they actually have preserved full network capabilities, or at least partial network capabilities, so people can play the fucking games that they bought, okay? All without requiring Nintendo. Now, of course, even RPCS3, one of my favorite PlayStation 3 emulators, because it really feels like Sony forgot about preserving that fucking system whatsoever. Yeah, even RPCN, ladies and gentlemen, RPCS3 has their own network that they've reverse engineered and put together so people can play games like Skate 3 together. People can play games like Demon Souls. Now, of course, obviously, they're not a massive community. You're looking at 27 people playing Demon Souls. But to give you an idea of why this stuff is important, me and my friend Imaru, me and him play a lot of old games. And for us, we wanted to play Red Dead Redemption. I think it was like 2 years ago. And obviously the PC version wasn't out. And even if the PC version was out, remember, nowadays companies will want to sell you $60 games with like multiplayer removed. Like single player is the only actual game mode, even though like back in the day when Red Dead came out, multiplayer was a pretty important part. It's something that I think a lot of people my age played if you were playing Red Dead at that era. So instead of, letting that multiplayer wither away and be lost, we were able to play together under RPCN. We had a whole good night of beers and playing some fucking Red Dead together. And not only that, we were able to play things like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker HD, and even abominations like Raccoon City Chronicles, like what was it, like the Resident Evil like third-person shooter game that we played co-op. These are all experiences that are preserved, thankfully, because of things like the community putting together the efforts to reverse engineer, server code, entire like solutions like this. Because at the end, all right, this is just the community trying to keep video games alive without the involvement of the official developers, because that's honestly at this point the only way that a lot of people can do it. And that's why initiatives like Stop Killing Games are important, because if you can get these companies, if you can get these publishers to actually look and design games going forward with an end-of-life plan, we don't have to resort to efforts like this to keep a lot of those old games alive. One of these sites that I used to go to was IJJI, and I'm sure I probably sparked some memories in a lot of you guys watching that are my age, because back in the day, going to IJJI, you could actually play games like Guns the Duel. And of course, one important game to me on this list was Drift City. Now, I made a video a few years ago where the community actually came together and used a private server solution to get Drift City here. Now, obviously, are there a lot of players playing this game? No, they've got 54 players online in the cel-shaded racing MMO. And for me, it's important that this exists because, again, I enjoy games like this. They're games that are preserved without the community's effort. I doubt any official server hoster is even thinking of making a game with an audience of 50 people on average. But the important part here is that the community was able to get leaked files, from my understanding, or at least reverse engineer a chunk of this game to keep it alive and functional. Because ultimately, these are all pieces of gaming history. And if you lose your video games, if you lose access to them, then it's a net negative for everyone involved. Even for Metal Gear Solid, right, there's projects like MGO, Save MGO, where players are able to play through Metal Gear Online 1, 2, and also play around with its DLC. One of my favorite channels on YouTube is Mach3, where he'll occasionally be live streaming PlayStation 3 games, PS2 games, and playing them online with viewers. These are dead games, but thanks to the technologies I talked about, he's able to play these experiences with his friends and his viewers. And again, these are experiences that are fucking, 10, 15, sometimes over 20 years old. And you can still play together because the community has banded and created solutions that have kept these games alive. And again, that comment that I read from Thor earlier just really drove me up the wall, because at the end, we all understand that games that are old are dead, and you're never going to get that experience that happened as those games were live. But is it worth losing those experiences at all, or just preventing people from getting access to them down the road? You know how many games get life literally 5-10 years down the road? Games like Among Us, which were the talk of the town years ago, were out for literally years. Until, of course, the community picked up and those servers went from 10 active players to millions overnight. How many games like that do you think exist that just die over the course? Games that are even innovative, games that actually have, a reason to be played, games that can be fun if they were just discovered. If we lose access to these video games and down the road, we maybe watch a video that ends up getting into the algorithm and we think, wow, I wish I could play that game, but now I can't because it's gone forever. That is the world we want to change. And I think that's why this initiative is so fucking important. If you look at things like why the EU matters here, is that in terms of economies, you're looking at the third largest economy after China and the United States. Meaning that if companies are pressured by EU law to think of end-of-life plans, because you're not going to ignore 15% of the world's GDP, you are going to think of this as an important market. If you're designing your games with an end-of-life plan, what happens in the EU ripples to all of these other countries. And that's how we all benefit. Unfortunately, me not being from the EU or being a Brit, I can't fucking actually sign any of these things. But I do know that I have to have a community of people that can sign this. In the amount of time I was yapping here, this number was at 511,000. If I refresh this page, it's up to 512. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is actual change. We're at 51%. We've got roughly a month Can we make it to the finish line? If you really care about preserving your video games, I think you will do what you can to get this across the finish. And let's say that you're not let's say that you're not from this country, you're not from the EU. You can still share this message. You can still share stopkillinggames.com across all of your gaming communities. And hopefully, if the government of Europe can look at this and start maybe taking this like actual like case seriously, it could actually be something that changes gaming going forward forever. At least that's what I think. But if you want to be a defeatist about it, no, that's your choice to make. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.